Hello, welcome back. I'm here with a Lucid Air Dream Edition range. I just did a 70-mile-an-hour highway range test with this guy for Inside EVs. That video is already up on the Inside EVs YouTube channel, so check it out. Now that we've driven it from 100% down to 0 in our range test, which by the way, it went 500 miles. Now that we're down at 0, we're going to plug into a 150 kilowatt Electrify America DC fast charger and record the whole charging session from 0 to 100%. Those that follow my channel might have seen the video I posted a couple months ago where I did a 0 to 100% DC fast charging session on a 350 kilowatt Electrify America DC fast charger. We're going to do it on a 150 kilowatt unit now and compare the difference. I'm going to put the two charge recordings side by side. We can see exactly the state of charge, the amount of power it's drawing, and all that good stuff. We might be surprised, and the 150 kilowatt DC fast charger ends up not taking that much longer to charge the Lucid Air. That's all because, while the car can accept over 300 kilowatts, it only does that for a short period of time. The battery gets really warmed up, and then it's got to start ramping down the power. At 150 kilowatt, it might be able to hold that longer. And while it might fall behind in the beginning, it might end up catching up later. I don't really know. We're going to find out coming up next as I put the two videos side by side and do a comparison. But first, please, if you like what we're doing here on State of Charge, click that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, give me a big like on this video, all that good stuff, so you don't miss any upcoming content here on State of Charge. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're charging the Air now on a 150 kilowatt Electrify America DC fast charger. Back in November, I did the 0 to 100% charge recording on a 350 kilowatt Electrify America DC fast charging station. And at that time, the Air just blew everybody away. It's the fastest charging electric vehicle available today, full stop. But would it be as quick on a 150 kilowatt DC fast charger? Now it shouldn't be, because the Air can accept up to 303 kilowatt. That's what we saw the peak charging rate, but it only holds it for a very short period of time. And then it starts ramping down because the battery cells get really hot. It can't sustain high charging level for that long. And the question is, if we start off at a lower charging rate, can it hold that charging rate longer? Where maybe in the beginning, the 350 kilowatt DC fast charger charges quicker, but will the 150 kilowatt unit catch up as the charging session goes on? That's what we're going to analyze. So I have the two charge recordings now. I'm going to put them side by side. One thing I want to mention is by the end of the recording, one of the recordings is about 30 to 40 seconds ahead of the other, and that's because I edit out when the screen times out. The Electrify America DC fast chargers, every 60 seconds, they time out and they put up a screen with just the state of charge. And when I do these recordings, I go back and edit those out because it really is annoying watching a video in time lapse where, every second or two, the screen just completely changes and just displays the state of charge. So in editing out all these tiny little clips, by the end of the recording, the two videos are out of balance, but only by about 30 seconds. But I just wanted to mention that in case somebody says at the end of the video, how come, one shows 60 minutes and the other one turns 61 minutes before the other one? That's why, because I edit these videos to make them more watchable. Okay, so let's jump into the side-by-side recording. We're going to blow through this, and then we have some deep analysis following up this side-by-side video. When charging starts, the Air on the 350 kilowatt unit is pulling an insane 292 kilowatt. On the 150 kilowatt station, the Air is taking in 173 kilowatts, more than the advertised power rating for that unit. And that's because of the Air's 900 volt battery architecture that allows it to pull in more power at a lower amperage. After 10 minutes of charging, the Air on the 350 kilowatt unit is at 34% state of charge, and the Air on the 150 kilowatt unit is at 21% state of charge. That's a difference of 13% state of charge. After 20 minutes, the gap widens a little bit more. The Air on the 350 kilowatt unit is at 57% state of charge, and the Air on the 150 kilowatt unit is at 43% state of charge. and that's a difference of 14% state of charge. Now at the half an hour mark, things start to turn. The air on the 350 kilowatt unit is at 72% state of charge, and the one on the 150 kilowatt unit is at 62% state of charge, down to only 10% state of charge. And from here on out, the air on the lower powered unit slowly starts catching up because it's charging at a higher rate. After 40 minutes of charging, there's only a 7% difference in the state of charge, 83% state of charge to 76% state of charge. And that's only about 35 miles of driving range, because with a 500 mile driving range, every percent of battery is good for about 5 miles. So really, after charging 40 minutes, there's only 35-mile difference when you're on a 150 kilowatt unit or a 350 kilowatt unit. Now at the 50-minute mark, that percentage is only down to 5% different, 91% state of charge and 86% state of charge. And when the 1 hour point hits, that difference is only 3%. 93% to 96%. Now at this point, most reasonable people would unplug and move on, or they probably would have a few minutes ago. Really isn't much need to state a DC fast charger beyond 80 or 85% because the charging rate really slows down unless you absolutely need that range. And with a car like the Air, it has so much range, just unplug at 80%. And at the 70-minute mark, we are tied, 98% to 98%. And the only thing left to find out was how long was it going to take to get from 98% to 100%. All electric cars charge really slowly when they get up to being almost completely full. The air on the 350 kilowatt unit shut off after 82 minutes of charging, and the air on the 150 kilowatt unit needed 6 more minutes and finished up after 88 minutes of charging. Pretty interesting, right? There isn't that much of a difference unless you plug in at a really low state of charge and only stay for like 15 or 20 minutes. If you stay longer than that, the 150 kilowatt DC fast charger starts catching up. And if you stay at a DC fast charger for like 40, 45 minutes, for some reason, maybe you plug in and you go inside to grab something to eat wherever the location is, it really doesn't make much of a difference at all. So next up, let's take a look at some of these screenshots I took in 5-minute increments after 5 minutes of charging, 10 minutes of charging, 15 minutes, all the way up to where the vehicle is like 98% charged. And we'll try to figure out at what point does it really not matter if you're plugged into a 150 kilowatt or a 350 kilowatt unit. The reason being is that there aren't a lot of 350 kilowatt DC fast chargers out there. The vast majority of the Electrify America network are 150 kilowatt units. Now, many locations have a 350 kilowatt unit or two, but there are plenty of locations that don't have 350 kilowatt DC fast chargers. They're only 150. So, after watching this video, hopefully you won't worry too much about charging that much slower because it doesn't make that much of a difference. The one point it does make a difference is if you plug in at a very low state of charge and you only stay for like 10 or 15 minutes. Then there's a big difference. But other than that, it's not that much of a difference. So let's take a look at the screenshots. So after only 5 minutes of charging, we have a pretty big difference. There's 7% state of charge. And don't forget, every percent state of charge is good for about 5 miles of driving range. So there's a difference of 35 miles of driving range after only 5 minutes of charging. This is where the 350 kilowatt charger really makes a big difference at low state of charge where the air is taking in a ton of power. And as you can see here, 24 kilowatt hour added compared to 15 kilowatt hour added. That's a big difference. And the air opens up even a bigger margin at the 10-minute mark, which we're going to take a look at next. After 10 minutes of charging, there's a 13% state of charge difference. Here's where the air is really taking advantage of that high power. The air on the 350 kilowatt station has added 170 miles of range. And the air on the lower powered unit is added 105 miles of range. Now still, I think most electric vehicle owners would sign on in a minute for 100 miles of range in 10 minutes of charging. But with the Air, only 105 miles after 10 minutes is actually slow charging. The 15-minute mark is a pivotal point, and I'll explain why. The air charging on the lower powered unit is at 32% state of charge, and on the 350 kilowatt unit, it's at 46% state of charge. That's 14% difference, a difference of 70 miles. And the air on the 150 kilowatt station has added 160 miles of range, while the air on the 350 kilowatt unit has added 230 miles. But take a look at the power both vehicles are currently drawing. It's 173 kilowatt for the lower powered station and 180 kilowatt on the 350 kilowatt station. It's at this point that the air on the lower powered station begins to accept more power. We don't even reach the 16-minute mark, and the air on the 150 kilowatt charger is actually pulling in more power than the air on the 350 kilowatt charger. And that's because the air on the higher powered station had been taking in so much power, the battery heated up, and the car has to start ramping down the power it takes in to let the thermal management cool things off. So from this point on, you're going to see a change in which vehicle is charging faster. When we reach the 20-minute mark, the air on the 350 kilowatt unit is no longer expanding its lead. It's held a 14% state of charge advantage, and that's because over the last 5 minutes, the charging powers were very similar. But as you can see now, the gap is widening as the lower powered unit is still delivering 173 kilowatt, while the air on the 350 kilowatt charger is only taking in 145 kilowatt. 5 minutes later, at the 25-minute mark, that 14% state of charge advantage is down to only 11%. And the difference in charging power is 140 kilowatt to 122 kilowatt. At the half an hour mark, the air on the 150 kilowatt unit is at 62%, and the air on the 350 kilowatt unit is only 10% more at 72%. Now think about that. In 30 minutes of charging, on the lower powered unit, you've added 310 miles of range, and on the higher powered unit, 360 miles of range. Now 50 miles is nothing to laugh at. It's a decent difference, but still, adding over 300 miles of range in 30 minutes of charging, that's fantastic for a road trip, and it's why the Air is the best charging electric vehicle available today. At the 40-minute mark, there's only a 7% difference in the state of charge, 76% to 83%. And now both vehicles are really ramping down their charging speed, and the charging speed on the lower powered unit is 89 kilowatt, while on the 350 kilowatt unit, it's 80 kilowatt. This is the point where we really recommend people unplug and move on, because you've already added about 5 hours of driving, regardless of which station you're plugged into. And after 5 hours of driving, most people need to take a break anyway and just hit up a next charger if you're on a super long trip. But if you need to remain plugged in, we did do this all the way to 100%. So let's take a look at where we're at 50 minutes. At 50 minutes, the gap is only 5%, 86% charged to 91% charged. And at this point, we're charging really slowly. Well, slowly for the Air at only 59 kilowatt on the 150 kilowatt unit and 48 kilowatt on the 350 kilowatt Electrify America DC fast charger. After 1 hour of charging, there's only a 3% difference. And take a look at that 350 kilowatt unit. It's down to only 28 kilowatt delivery. While it's at 96%, that's actually pretty good for a vehicle that's at 96% state of charge. Typically, we see even lower than 28 kilowatt. While on the 150 kilowatt unit, we're at 93% state of charge, and that's still pulling in 42 kilowatt. And finally, after an hour and 10 minutes, we are tied at 98%. Now you notice the 150 kilowatt unit is delivering double the power as the 350 kilowatt unit, 24 kilowatt to 12 kilowatt. And that's because the Air on the 350 kilowatt station reached 98% a few minutes earlier, so it was already ramping down even more. The lower powered unit just reached 98%, so it was still taking in a little bit more power, but that's going to change over the course of the next few minutes. The Air charging on the 350 kilowatt unit shuts off 12 minutes later at the 82-minute mark, and the Air on the 150 kilowatt unit needed another 18 minutes and completed its 0 to 100% charging cycle after 88 minutes of charging. And because we love to analyze charging to death here and you could never have too much information, I produced 2 charts for us to take a look and compare these two charging sessions. One is the charging power chart and the other one is the time to charge chart. Hopefully these will give you a better idea of exactly how many miles are added per minute and how long you'd have to charge on the 150 kilowatt and 350 kilowatt station to add X amount of miles. Because quite honestly, that's what it all comes down to. Most people don't care about how many kilowatt the unit's pulling or even how many kilowatt hour they pump into their battery pack. They just want to know, how long do I have to stop and charge to add X amount of miles? And we're going to give it to you right here. So first up, let's take a look at the charging power graph. And here you can see the blue line is the 350 kilowatt station and the red line is the 150 kilowatt station. Take a look at the beginning of the charging session on the 350 kilowatt unit. We're up over 300 kilowatt, only till about 20% state of charge, actually a little bit less. And that's when the power starts ramping down. And after about 42 minutes, it's taking in less than 200 kilowatt. Now let's take a look at the 150 kilowatt charging session. As soon as we plug in, we're pulling in 173 kilowatt, and it just holds that perfectly straight line all the way up to about 47% state of charge. And by the time we're at about 52%, the charging curves merge and they're the same all the way up to 100% state of charge. Those of you that watched my air charging video on the 350 kilowatt unit may remember that I commented that I wish Lucid had allowed the charging rate to remain higher for a longer period of time, say closer to 80% state of charge. We've seen other electric vehicles like the Porsche Taycan and the Hyundai Ioniq 5 hold a higher charging rate for a longer period of time. And I have good news on that front. When I was doing this charging session, I did talk to Lucid engineers, and they had said that at some point in the future, perhaps not too far in the future, there's going to be an over-the-air update that's going to allow the Air to hold a higher charging rate for a longer period of time. So you might see something like this on a 350 kilowatt station and something like this on a 150 kilowatt station. Of course, at 80%, the charge rate is going to start to drop off dramatically. But if they could squeeze more power into the pack up to about 75 or 80%, this great charging electric vehicle will be even better. All right, next up, let's take a look at the time to charge chart. And on the x-axis down on the bottom, we have the charging time from 0 up to 90 minutes. And the y-axis is the state of charge. The thing you want to really take a look at is the gap between the two lines. And as you can see in the beginning, it immediately starts to open up and continues to get wider until about the 15-minute mark. It's at that point when the gap between these two lines slowly begins to decrease. The blue line ends at the 82-minute mark and the red line ends at 88 minutes. But as I mentioned earlier, what really matters is how long does it take to add X amount of miles. So I've added in 100-mile increments just how long it takes when you're charging on both charging stations. The Air Dream Edition range that I did these charging tests on has an EPA range rating of 520 miles per charge. However, in my 70-mile-an-hour highway range test, I linked to that video in the description of this video if you'd like to see that. I finished up with exactly 500 miles of range. And when I do these charging session comparisons and talk about how many miles per minute, I prefer to use my personal experience of how far I went with the vehicle. So I'm using 500 miles as the Air's range here, not the EPA range rating of 520 miles. So let's take a look at how the Air charged on both the 350 kilowatt and 150 kilowatt DC fast charger. Now, another thing I'd like to note is we plugged in at 0% state of charge and charged to 100%. People are not going to do that in the real world. I mean, very rarely would you ever drive a car down to 0%, especially a car with such a long range as a Lucid Air. There's just really no reason to. You're going to be plugging in at a higher state of charge, maybe 5%, maybe 10%, maybe even 20%. It really depends on how far you're going and where the chargers are placed along your route. And the higher state of charge that you plug in, the less of a difference there's going to be between these two different power levels that you charge at. So this is actually the worst case scenario as far as how much difference there's going to be in a 350 kilowatt unit and a 150 kilowatt unit. The higher the state of charge you plug in at, there's going to be less of a difference. So let's take a look if you were to plug in at 0% like I did. The Air charging on the 350 kilowatt DC fast charger added 100 miles of range in only 5.5 minutes. On the 150 kilowatt unit, it took 9 minutes, almost twice as long. To add back 200 miles of driving range, the 350 kW unit did it in 12 minutes. And the 150 kilowatt DC fast charger needed 18 minutes. Now that's the point where you have the widest gap between the two charging sessions. From here on out, the gap slowly narrows. So basically, the biggest difference is in the first 15 minutes of charging. After that, once you've added back about 200 miles of range, basically the charging curve is the same. If I could lower the blue line down on top of the red line, you would see from there on out, it's exactly the same. So the only real advantage you have when you're using a 350 kilowatt unit is at a very low state of charge and only for about 15 minutes. After that, the charging curves are nearly identical. The 350 kilowatt unit adds back 300 miles in 22 minutes. The 150 kilowatt unit needs an additional 6 minutes, and it reaches 300 miles added in 28 minutes. Getting up to the 400 mile plateau, the 350 kilowatt unit adds it back in 37 minutes. I mean, that's crazy. 400 miles is greater range than just about any other electric vehicle available today has, and the Air can add it back in a little more than a half an hour. No other electric vehicle can even come close to that. And on the 150 kilowatt DC fast charger, it takes 43 minutes, 6 minutes longer. So as you can see, it only took me 6 minutes longer to reach 200 miles, 300 miles, and 400 miles on the Air when I'm charging on a 150 kilowatt unit compared to the 350 kilowatt unit. So, I mean, this really demonstrates that you really shouldn't stress and try to find a 350 kilowatt unit. It doesn't make that much of a difference. The only difference it makes is if you plug in at a really low state of charge and only plan on staying at the charging station for like 10 or 15 minutes. Then it makes a difference. Once you get beyond that 10, 15 minute wait, it really doesn't make that big of a difference. And if you're on a very long road trip covering many hundreds of miles, an extra 5 or 6 minutes at the DC fast charger really isn't going to make any big impact on your journey at all. Well, there you have it. The complete 0 to 100% comparison when charging a Lucid Air Dream Edition range on a 150 kilowatt Electrify America DC fast charger and a 350 kilowatt Electrify America DC fast charger. It's not that big of a difference, right? I mean, a lot of people that don't really understand charging assume, oh wow, it's going to charge twice as fast on a 350 kilowatt unit. That's not the case. It's actually pretty close. And as I said, I think a couple of times in the video, it only really makes a difference if you plug in at a very low state of charge and unplug pretty quickly, 10 or 15 minutes of charging, and that's it. Then it makes a difference, but other than that, it's not that much of a difference. Another thing I want to note is you may have noticed that the charging station showed that it dispensed a little over 132 kilowatt hour to the Air in this charging video. And in the original charging video that I did on the 350 kilowatt DC fast charger, it showed that it had dispensed 134 kilowatt hour of energy. So that's how much the charging station dispenses. It's not how much the vehicle takes into its battery, because there's always charging losses. And the higher the rate of charging, and the Air charges at really high rates, over 300 kilowatts, the more charging losses you're going to have. So you will notice in these two charging sessions that were both 0 to 100, the session I did on the 150 kilowatt unit used a little bit less energy. There were less losses because we didn't charge at such a high rate. Now, it wasn't much. It was about 2 kilowatt hour of less losses, but it does show that the higher you charge, the higher rate you charge at, the more energy is wasted, and that's heat loss during the charging process. One of the things I forgot to do, well, I didn't forget to do it, but I made a mistake. Inside the Air, it shows you how many kilowatt hour the vehicle is taking in during a charging session. But what I didn't realize was as soon as you unplug the charging station, that information goes away and you can't recall it. I had intended on taking a picture of the in-car system to show that how much kilowatt hour the vehicle took in, and it was 117 kilowatt hour when I finished. Now the Air has a 118 kilowatt hour battery pack, but as I noted when I did the 70 mile an hour highway range test, the vehicle showed that I had only used 117 kilowatt hour during that range test. Then I immediately did this DC fast charge session, and the vehicle showed that I had added back 117 kilowatt hour. But I didn't get that snapshot because I didn't know the screen goes away as soon as you unplug. I unplugged the charger, went inside the car to take the picture, and it was gone. But I will be able to do it again because I already talked to Lucid, and I'm going to set up at some point in the future, I'm going to go back out and do a 10 to 80% DC fast charge session on the Lucid Air. And that's because a lot of my followers are telling me, look, Tom, could you give us 10 to 80% when you do these DC fast charge tests? Because, and as I mentioned in the video, nobody really charges from 0 to 100%. We record that just to show the entire charging curve, but that's not what people are going to witness in real life. People are going to plug in at all different states of charge. But the typical driver isn't going to want to go too much below 10% state of charge, just concerned about running out. So we're going to do 10 to 80% charging sessions on all the electric vehicles that we get. I just did one on a Hyundai Ioniq 5. That video is going to be up in about a week, and I charged it from 10 to 80%, and then I also did the 0 to 100% so we can compare them. But I am going to get a Lucid Air at some point in the future and do 10 to 80%. So that'll be a follow-up video on these two charging videos we've already done on the Lucid Air. Listen, it's a really exciting new vehicle that has a lot of interest, so we're going to get as much content on this vehicle as we can. Well, that's it for the Lucid Air DC fast charge 150 kilowatt to 350 kilowatt charging station comparison. We hope you like what we're doing here on State of Charge. If so, please don't forget, click that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming content. And thanks for watching.